Wow, this house is cute. But can I really get in the game in this economy? I do have savings, and I am responsible-ish. Ugh, I should bury it. I'm being wild. But what if I'm not being wild, though? Could I actually score a...
Kick off your home buying journey with Zillow's new BuyAbility tool. It makes it easy to find out what you can afford, so you can get off the bench and onto the playing field with confidence. Check your BuyAbility, only on Zillow.
Baseball in Ireland? Yeah, it's a thing. And it's got a history that might surprise you. This week, we're heading across the Atlantic Ocean to explore how America's pastime found its way to the Emerald Isle. We'll talk about the pioneers, the setbacks, the unlikely heroes, and how baseball carved out a niche in a country better known for hurling and Gaelic football. So settle in, and let's learn about the story of how baseball came to Ireland. Today, on Rounders, A History of Baseball in America. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another week, another episode of Rounders, A History of Baseball in America. I'm your host, Jeff Lambert. It's great to be back with you. So today we have a new entry into our newish ongoing series about baseball abroad. So I think we really started this with the first episode of this podcast way back in 2018, where I talked about the origins of baseball, some of the ball and stick games from around the world that eventually culminated into the sport we see today. I consider that as kind of the pioneering entry into this recurring series. But a month ago, might have been 2 months ago, we did an episode about how baseball came to Australia. And the feedback I got from you, the audience, was very overwhelming, just how excited people were to be able to hear about how baseball arrived in different countries. So in honor of St. Patrick's Day, we're going to go to Ireland and see how baseball arrived there, talk about some of the high points, the low points of its growth and exposure, and then also how baseball stands today. So I think you're going to love this episode, honestly. It was really fun to research. I like being able to see how baseball has grown around the world outside of the United States. It has me thinking maybe I have to change the subheadline of this podcast. Instead of saying A History of Baseball in America, maybe I need to think about how baseball has affected globally different countries. We'll see. One thing at a time, right? So let's go ahead and jump into it and talk about how baseball arrived in the Emerald Isle, Ireland. Let's start our story by talking about the origins of baseball in Ireland. So according to available historical records, the first documented baseball game that occurred in this country didn't take place until August 24, 1874. A little bit more on that later, just keep that date in mind. Before this event, Ireland did have a rich tradition of bat and ball sports. There wasn't a total absence of that type of game. So some examples of those bat and ball sports that were played in the country before 1874 included, let's start off by talking about hurling. This is one of the most ancient and celebrated Irish games. So the sport, if you're not familiar, involves players using a wooden stick known as a hurley or a caman to strike a small ball called a sleatar. And the object is to score by sending that ball, the sleatar, between the opponent's goalposts, either over the crossbar for 1 point or under it into a net for a goal, which can count up for 3 points. So the sport has always relied on speed and skill. It's described by modern watchers as the fastest game on grass. So that's one example of a ball and stick game that we saw in Ireland before baseball arrived. Another example is Rounders, not just the name of this show. And this game wasn't just popular in England. It had a wide following in Ireland as well. And as we've discussed in that Origins of Baseball episode, I'll include a link in the show notes if you haven't gotten there yet, Rounders is one of the main ancestral forerunners to baseball, and of course why I named the show that. So if you're not familiar, Rounders, very similar. Players use a bat to hit a small, hard ball, and then they have to run around a set of bases in order to score. So this game has been played in Ireland for centuries. It remains a popular sport even today. It's mainly played by school kids. It's kind of a schoolyard game. It's kept that sort of aura. And so we saw that in Ireland. And with both of these sports, again, we see some forerunners to baseball in terms of ball and stick, but we also had something called the Tailteann Games. This was an Irish event that dated back to at least the 6th century, and it was a chance for different communities to come together and participate in various athletic contests. And that included ball and stick games that are considered precursors to modern sports like hurling, which we saw. So these games were held in honor of the goddess Tiltiu, and they included competitions like running, jumping, and like we said, hurling. So these are all examples that Ireland did have a very rich heritage of playing ball and stick games like baseball, but we didn't see an actual baseball game played there until 1874. So let's fast forward to 1874 and talk about it. So that date, that first baseball game, was actually part of an event that was held by an American-led tour to the British Isles. It was organized by two guys. One of them was the manager of the Boston Red Stockings, a guy by the name of Harry Wright, and Philadelphia Athletics manager Dick McBride. They got together and said, let's take our clubs, who were both really two of the premier clubs in baseball in the late 1800s, and they said, let's plant the seeds of the sport globally and also make a little bit of extra cash for our clubs. So this is not related. This tour is not related to a similar tour that we discussed that brought baseball to Australia in 1888, 14 years later, which was sponsored by Harry Spalding. This is completely separate, not connected, but both of them had the same goal. They wanted to promote baseball abroad. So the Red Stockings and the Athletics, two of the top teams in the National Association of Professional Baseball Players, they were invited to go to Ireland to be able to play in this exhibition game and bring baseball for the first time as an organized event for Irish people to see. So these exhibition events were actually not originally scheduled as part of the tour. They were added on as the final stop at the end of the British Isles tour that had already begun. And games were not originally planned to happen because they didn't think that there would be an audience for this. But at the very last minute, the organizers decided, you know what, we're close by. Let's stop over and have some events in Ireland. So they scheduled a 2-day showcase in the city of Dublin. And this was a major urban area. Obviously, it makes sense. It's, right there close by. The thinking was it'll draw attention. It'll get people to come out. The owners, organizers of the event heavily advertised that they were coming to Dublin for this 2-day exhibition. There were posters put up all over the city. There were newspaper notices, flooded the city to just spark that curiosity. So in this 2-game event, Boston won the first game 12-7, and then the following day, the Athletics won 15-4. But overall, the games in Dublin drew disappointing crowds compared to the tour's England matches. So you could look at that and say, well, there's just no interest in the sport. But taking a look at it overall, the poor planning was probably the reason why the reception was so low. Remember, this was added on at the end of the tour, last minute. There were other things going on scheduled during those same 2 days in Dublin that were big deals. So just to give you an example, the Baldoyle horse races, which is a national event, was taking place that same weekend where this was occurring. And you also had the National Agricultural Show that was also happening during this time. So both of those were competing with people to choose what they wanted to go and see. And unfortunately, baseball, which was a novelty at the time, just didn't win out over those two events. So local sports fans, potential curious spectators, they chose other options, unfortunately. There was actually one American reporter from the Boston Herald who was on scene, and he called the Dublin series in his article, quote, the worst failure of all the stops on the tour in terms of turnout. He also said later on in the article, the baseballists went begging for spectators, end quote, because only a few hundred people actually showed up, which was far fewer than expected. So they actually lost money on this part of the leg of the tour, this final stop. So it wasn't a success in that regard. But as a result, this is the first introduction of baseball to Ireland. It didn't leave a lasting presence necessarily. No clubs or leagues were formed locally. But we have a foot in the door, as they say. So this will reap, I think, effects later on, as we'll see. But for the time being, cricket, horse racing, other sports that were native to the island remained obviously far more popular, and baseball really remained a mild curiosity to the Irish. We need to fast forward approximately 60 years into the future before we see Ireland found its first baseball team. So we did see some local fans attempt to get together in the 1930s to establish an official league in the country, a presence. But it wasn't in the American style of baseball. As a matter of fact, these individuals decided we want the league to adopt the British baseball code instead of the American. So you may be asking yourself, what's the difference between British, also called Welsh, baseball rules and American baseball rules, especially during this time? Real quick, let's go through them. So number one, the bat type is different. Under Welsh baseball rules, it's a flat bat, very similar to a cricket bat, whereas with American baseball, we have a more rounded bat. The ball type is different. In British baseball rules, it's usually larger and softer, like a softball, whereas with American baseball, you have a smaller, harder ball. The pitching style is different in British baseball. So there's an underhand with a straight arm delivery. And of course, in American baseball, we have the overhand or the sidearm with various speeds and spins. For batting rules, under British rules, you get one swing per pitch. Of course, in American baseball, you can take multiple swings until strikeout or contact. I think the biggest difference is under British baseball rules, there's only 2 innings per game, as opposed to American baseball where we have 9 innings. There are many other slight variations between the two, but the point is that these baseball fans that decided they finally wanted to establish their own league in Ireland were more influenced, it seems, by the baseball growth that they saw with their neighbors in England as opposed to American baseball across the ocean. So in 1933, we see the formation of the first Irish Baseball League using British rules, and that marked the creation of the Irish Baseball Union, the IBU. They founded this official league with 2 main goals. Number 1, expand the sport in the country. And number 2, they wanted to field a national team that could compete against England and eventually the United States in exhibition matches. So some of the inaugural teams as part of the IBU were from familiar, recognizable cities, obviously, especially if you're still in Ireland. Places like St. Mary's fielded a team, St. Oswald's. We saw a club called Hibernians. We saw a club called Independent. There was a club from Connacht that was founded. And all of these clubs were formed, but I think an interesting footnote that shows here is these inaugural teams that were part of the IBU, they were centered around major churches throughout the country. So congregations were really responsible for fielding teams, not only in terms of players, but putting up the money to be able to help these teams travel and meet expenses. So the IBU really was a religious-backed organization at the point of its creation. But this is a big moment because we see the first National Baseball League founded in Ireland, the IBU. Now, we talked about that they had 2 goals when they started off. Of course, expand the sport across the country, and then, of course, to play in international exhibitions. There was an early accomplishment right off the bat. The IBU was able to schedule a game in 1933, later that same season, where the Irish Baseball Union sent a squad of its best players in its inaugural season to face the national team from England. So the club actually traveled to Liverpool to take on this England team, which was made up mostly of top players from clubs in that city itself. And they also invited some pros from nearby Merseyside club. So you had Liverpool and Merseyside players coming together, forming a squad to be able to play against the Irish club. The final score was rough. England ended up winning by 42 runs. And the game overall didn't attract a huge amount of press coverage back in Ireland, again, because it's still a novelty. But we see, I think, for the first time, an international game has now been established. Players traveled to play in an established league in England, this exhibition match. So we see a league formed and we see an international event occur for Irish baseball. Now, on the downside, the IBU only lasted one season due to funding and revenue issues. Baseball just wasn't ready for the mainstream yet, but we can mark this as an important point in the history of baseball in Ireland.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy, champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
So we have a world tour from the United States make landing in Ireland for its first game on that soil. We see the formation of the country's first league in the IBU. We see Ireland participate in its first international match shortly after that founding. When did Irish baseball finally surge in popularity? We have to jump forward even more in time for this event to occur. We have to go specifically to the 1950s, so almost 20 years after the founding of the IBU. So we focus in on a gentleman named Clive Butterworth, who was an Englishman, and he played a really important role in further popularizing the sport in Ireland. See, Butterworth had developed a passion for baseball while he lived in Canada, and he ended up moving in the late 1950s to Waterford County in Ireland. Now, once he settled in there, he decided, I kind of miss baseball in my life. So he decided to found a youth club in the nearby town of Traymore in 1958. The team ended up nicknaming themselves the Sea Lions, and they started to attract interested local crowds. And the growing popularity of baseball in Traymore ended up with the founding of a second youth club in nearby Waterford, and they named themselves the Walruses. So those two teams started to play each other. More fans were interested and started coming out to see games, and we saw a third team formed 2 hours away from these two clubs in the city of Dublin shortly thereafter. So remember, this all happened very quickly. 1958, we see this start to happen. 4 years later, in 1962, Butterworth felt like he had enough of an interested base that he organized an exhibition game in Waterford that featured 2 teams from the United States Air Force. And this event further fueled interest in baseball amongst the Irish public. It was becoming a daily opportunity to be able to see teams come out and play the sport. Now, sadly, in such a short amount of time, Butterworth made such an impact on just spreading the game in terms of familiarity, but his health began to decline in the mid-1960s, and his efforts ultimately stopped because of that. But baseball finally had its breakthrough moment, because we see it gaining traction throughout the country in several different areas, and most importantly, it's gaining traction with the youth. So Butterworth's pioneering efforts certainly helped plant the seeds with the public in Ireland for good, and continuing the efforts of trying to make sure that it lasted by putting it in the interest area of kids, which was huge. It's the early development, and it's still recognized in the country today as a major effort, a major milestone in baseball becoming ingrained in the culture and not leaving. So we're jumping about 20 to 30 years as we go. We're going to keep going. We're going to go to 1986. So 1986 overall was a very historic year for baseball. We had the International Olympic Committee. They voted to make the sport an official medal competition for the first time. Yes, that's right. And it took until 1986 for baseball to become a medal competition in the Olympics. So it was voted that year that beginning in 1992, with the Summer Olympics in Barcelona, Spain, that baseball was going to be a sport that countries could represent and play in a medal competition for. So very shortly after, the International Baseball Federation, the IBAF, decided, you know what? Because of this development, we have to aggressively expand our operations in more countries than we exist in right now. They saw the interest in Ireland as a result of what Butterworth had done, as a result of a national baseball league being founded, even if it was short-lived, and because of the international competitions that we saw. And the IBAF said, you know what, that's good enough. We believe that we can set up a presence officially in Ireland. So in 1989, the IBAF officially established the Irish Baseball and Softball Federation, which is now known as Baseball Ireland. They had a very similar mission to the first league that was founded, except this is an organization that's founded on a global level. So their goal was they were going to develop and promote baseball and softball across the island. They were going to establish a national team again, obviously to play in the Olympics, and they were going to found international youth squads in Ireland for under 18 and under 15 competitions. Now, again, I reiterate, this is important because the IBAF has money to spend to be able to make this happen. This is not the result of just local individuals trying to get something going grassroots. This is an established presence coming in and saying, we're going to put money into making sure baseball stays in Ireland and grows to become a sport that's synonymous with the other major options. So just 7 years later, in 1996, Ireland played its first international competition within the IBAF. This was a European Championship series that was held in Hull, England, and a team from Ireland participated. And it received significant press coverage this time across the country. And it paved the way for what's going to happen next, which was another national league to be founded within the country. And we don't have to jump 20 years in the future to see this development happen. Just a year after that international competition, we saw the Irish Baseball League form just 1 year later. And that league, with the backing of the IBAF, with some money behind it, the league featured teams from regions across the entire country. They established clubs in Dublin, Ashbourne, Belfast, Cork, Greystones, Portmernock. I hope I'm saying that correct. Portmernock. There were presences in a lot of major urban areas across the country, which is a huge step forward. And the Irish Baseball League, I am happy to let you know, started in 1997. It's still going strong today. As a matter of fact, as of 2024, they've expanded to 11 clubs, and they have a really fast-growing youth program attached. So baseball, even though from 1874 until now, it took a long time to get to this point, those major events along the way culminated into the development of a national organization to promote the sport, a national league that can continue growing interest, and then, of course, a club that can compete on the international level whenever there are events that come along. So where does baseball stand in Ireland today, and what are things looking like for the future of baseball in the country? So I'm happy to report that there is an established international program. There's a National Baseball League, as we talked about, and these have just been the starting points for growth of the sport in this country. The 21st century has been really good for baseball's growth in the Emerald Isle. So let me give you some examples of what's been going on over the past 25 years in terms of growth of the sport. Number one, we had the founding of an international baseball center just in 2015. So there is a state-of-the-art facility. It's the country's premier baseball facility, and it's used specifically for visiting countries so they can host exhibition matches, and it's the home field for the Ashbourne Baseball Club and the Irish national baseball team. This is a really nice stadium, brand new. It's a place where games can be hosted and teams to be able to come and play, and it gives Ireland an air of, I think, professionalism that it needed to be able to continue growing their cred across not only other leagues across the world, but also, I think, internally with the country. That money's being spent to grow baseball. So that's one example. Another example, there was a state-of-the-art strike zone facility that was built in Ireland recently. This was an indoor training area that was meant to promote year-round player development. So if you played in the Irish Baseball League, or currently play in the Irish Baseball League, there's a place where you can go and train even during the cold months. But it's not just for professionals. It's open to the general public. if you have an interest in baseball, you can go there, you can receive training, and you can actually just play the sport. So it's a great way for people who even have a passing interest in the game to be able to get in there and actually try it out, and to meet some of the pros of the Irish Baseball League who go there to train during the off season. I think this was a brilliant development by Baseball Ireland. We also see growth in national and international competitions. So since that 1996 series where they played in the European Championship, the Ireland national baseball team has continued improving its status. The club actually just won the gold medal at the 2018 European Baseball Championship in the C pool. So that's a big development, 100%. We also see Ireland hosting European Baseball Championship qualifiers at that International Baseball Center in Ireland. So clubs are coming to play right within the country, and fans are showing up to watch these exhibition events. This just happened in 2024, right there. So this wasn't something that happened 20 years ago. It's happening now. So these events are placing baseball in front of Irish spectators on a regular basis, and it's helping grow the sport's popularity. And I think most importantly, just like we saw in the late 1950s with the promotion of youth clubs, the founding of youth clubs, Baseball Ireland, the organization, has really stayed busy. They host a lot of events. They've set up a lot of programs that are aimed at nurturing youth interest in baseball. So there's school programs, there's kids clubs, and they're designed to introduce children to baseball and to grow like a steady pipeline of future talent for Irish baseball. I think that's super key, and these are flourishing. What about Major League Baseball? Have we seen any Irish products enter the league yet? There's no current MLB players that were born in Ireland that are in the show right now, but more and more players are emerging as a result of this past 25 years of really focus on growing the sport. So some examples of players that have, I think, come from these efforts. Number one, individual named Packy Naughton. Great name. And yes, he is from Boston, Massachusetts. He's a left-handed pitcher with a name like Packy. You've got to be from Boston, right? So Packy has a very strong Irish heritage. I believe his parents were ones that came from Ireland, so he has almost direct descendants. He was selected by the Cincinnati Reds in the 9th round of the 2017 MLB draft, and he has spent time with the Los Angeles Angels and the St. Louis Cardinals. He is not currently in the MLB, but we see a guy with almost direct links to Ireland spending time in Major League Baseball. We also have PJ Conlon. PJ was born in Belfast, which is in Northern Ireland. He is the first Irish-born player to appear in a major league game since 1945. His family relocated to California from Dublin during his childhood, but he was born there. He developed an interest in the sport while in Ireland. He was drafted by the New York Mets in the 13th round of the 2015 MLB draft. So his time in the majors was short, but he had stints with the Mets and he spent time with the Dodgers. He was released in 2019 and he retired from professional baseball. But again, a huge step forward. And then we have a gentleman named Adam Mako. So Adam was born in Slovakia, but his family ended up moving to Ireland. And while he was in Ireland, he learned about baseball and he took a really strong interest in the sport. So Mako was drafted by the Seattle Mariners in the 7th round of the 2019 MLB draft. And as of 2023, Mako is considered a very promising pitching prospect in the Mariners system. I was looking for an update on him for the 2024 and 2025 seasons. I couldn't specifically find one, but I see that he's still in the pipeline. So if anybody has more information about Mako, let me know, and I'll add a footnote to this. But he's known for his high strikeout rates. He's known as a promising prospect, so we may see Mako end up in the MLB soon. Remember, he was only drafted in 2019, so we'll have to see. So we're seeing the fruits of these labors start to show, and I think that's really exciting for Irish baseball. So I conclude this by saying I think Ireland's baseball future is very bright. It's definitely one to watch. I think Baseball Ireland has made incredible strides in developing the sport. I think that the establishment of a national league that's there to stay, for them taking part in international competitions, them putting money down to create these state-of-the-art facilities like the International Baseball Center and the Strike Zone are huge steps forward. And then you've got their growing youth program and the increasing participation in these international competitions. I think it's very safe to say that Irish baseball is on a clear upward trajectory. So as more talent emerges and interest continues to surge, I'm excited to see how Ireland is going to make an even greater impact on the baseball stage. So keep an eye out. I think the best is yet to come for baseball in Ireland. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of another episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. It means the world to me. If you haven't had a chance, please take a moment. If you can leave a review for the show on the podcast platform of your choice, that always helps with the algorithm. Tell a friend, let them know. If you haven't signed up on Substack, take a minute to do that too. I send these out in written form. I've been doing more videos lately of these episodes. Whole bunch of stuff you might be missing out on if you're just listening to the audio version. So everything's in the show notes if you have more questions about that. But overall, thanks for connecting. It's great to be with you, and I will see you next week for another episode. Thanks for joining us for this episode as we explored another amazing moment from baseball history. You can help grow the show by liking us on YouTube and your podcast app of choice. Don't forget to head on over and sign up for the free email newsletter and the bonus show, This Week in Baseball History. Just go to www.rounders.substack.com. A special thanks to our premium subscribers that are helping us grow for just $1.25 a week, and to our starting 9 supporters, Nathan Halverson and Jack Wilson. You are the producers helping make this the top baseball history show out there. See you next week, and remember, there are only 2 seasons, winter and baseball.